All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Dave. This channel is called The Radical Independent. Thanks for being here. Got a very special guest with us, one of the, I guess, favorite guests of this channel, James Roguski. James, how are you, sir?
I am here to surprise and amaze today. So let me just get right into it, Dave. I showed you a little tiny clip before we started, and I know it was, befuddling. So I'm just going to share my screen and dive right into this. And so um, maybe this will be a clue as to what I just showed you. But
Ah,
let me ask you if you are aware that last year on May 27th, amendments to the international health regulations were adopted. Is that on your radar? Have you heard about that?
I do vaguely remember something, probably because of you, James, and your
Okay.
hard work. Yeah.
Okay. So this is not about the current proposed pandemic treaty, right? We've spoken about the fact that the alternative media and a lot of people are talking about a proposed pandemic treaty. This is not just about that. This is not just about the proposed amendments to the international health regulations that I've been trying to get people to pay attention to. This is mostly about the fact that proposed amendments to the international health regulations were adopted last year. Now, if that's news to you, that's a truth bomb.
Okay.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. And so, have you ever been introduced to this fine gentleman, Richard Visick? He's the acting legal advisor to the Secretary of State. Dave, has anybody made you aware that there's such a thing as the acting legal advisor to the Secretary of State?
Legal advisor. Is he a lawyer?
I would imagine so. And so,
Okay.
it makes all the sense in the world that the Secretary of State has a legal advisor, right? Secretary of State doesn't necessarily, isn't necessarily a lawyer skilled in all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so the office of the legal advisor is responsible for the oversight of negotiations of international agreements and treaties. Starting to get a hint as to where this is going. Okay. People are busy negotiating treaties and amendments to international health regulations. The Office of the Legal Advisor furnishes advice on all legal issues, domestic and international, arising in the course of State Department work. This includes assisting State Department and policy officers in formulating and implementing the foreign policies of the United States and promoting the development of international law and the fundamental elements of these policies. Okay. Well, I've got this is an open letter to the legal advisor, right?
Mhm.
I've got a whole bunch of questions, not the least of which is centered right around here. Okay. This is from the law. This is government website,
Yeah.
right? Didn't mean to click that, but here's where we're going. This is the actual law. If it takes its dear old time, I'm not making this stuff up. I never make stuff up.
Right.
This is the evidence. And one of his main jobs, right, is to determine if modifying an existing agreement or treaty should also be considered as a treaty or an agreement that would require Senate advice and consent and should be treated as, oh, not just a little tiny minor change of a typo, but
Hmm.
something substantial is being changed. Well, Senator Ron Johnson um, has a bill in Congress, I'm sorry, in the Senate, Senate Bill 444. 43 Republicans have signed on. So plus him is 44. So that leaves, I don't know, five or so Republicans in the leadership who have not signed on. And his bill says, well, if they can pass that bill, which they're probably not going to be able to, and get the president to sign it, then the negotiations about the current pandemic treaty should be subject to the advice and consent of the Senate.
Yeah.
Hey, Senator Johnson, I've been trying to reach your office. You don't got to go through all that trouble. Just give little Dickie Visick a call. That's his job. He's the person who is the legal advisor to the Secretary of State, and his job is to determine whether or not pending negotiated agreements are a treaty or not a treaty and should be treated as such. Just give the guy a phone call. That's his job. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the screen share where we left off here. And so I have a whole bunch of questions, right? And so the last year, right, we went through all of this last year. There were amendments that were proposed and they were kicked to the curb. And most people are unaware that after the Biden's proposed amendments to 13 articles were kicked to the curb, a totally different set of amendments were brought forth, and they were adopted on May 27th. Okay. Now, this gentleman here in the video that we're about to play, Colin Visick, I'm sorry, not Colin Visick, I'm getting a little brain fart here. Colin McIff. Richard Visick is the legal advisor to the Secretary of State. Colin McIff is the delegate last year. This year, Colin's gotten a little bit of a promotion. He's vice chairperson of the working group that is considering all of these amendments. Okay. Now, I hope you can see the YouTube video.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to make sure that this works properly, and I'm going to share with sound, and hopefully we will be able to watch. I'll set the stage for what's going on here, right?
All right.
Earlier on in this video, Colin Visick talks about some of the really boring little tiny details that they were busy negotiating in a back room. What they did prior to this, now this is from May 27th of 2022. They were having trouble reaching agreement, so they shut down the cameras. They set up an informal meeting in a back room at the Palace of Nations, and they all went in the back and made a deal, right? You know, Monty Hall or whatever, let's make a deal. They all went in the back, they reached agreement, and then they came back, and this is the president of the proceedings, right? He's not the president of any nation or whatever. It's like, you know, the assembly that met last May. He's, you know, conducting the meeting, and Colin McIff gave all of the, you know, discussions about, you know, what they were about to discuss. They're about to mention the document that is the amendments that they're considering, and then they're going to do what's called the silence procedure. And it's pretty common stuff. They're just going to say, look, you know, here's the document that we've been talking about. Are there any objections? And if there aren't any objections, it will be thusly adopted. This was absolutely surreal when I was watching this live last year. Please, Dave, let me know that you can hear the video okay.
Okay.
I don't see any
You hear it fine?
Yeah.
Okay.
request. So I would like to make sure that if the committee now ready to approve the draft resolutions contained in A75/A Conf 7 Revision 1, the financial and administrative implication of this resolution may be found in document A75A/Conf/7 at 1. I am asking you if the committee is ready to approve the draft resolution in question. I see no objection. I see no objection. Therefore, the resolution is adopted with these amendments. Therefore, I repeat, the resolution is approved with amendment.
All right. So what just happened there, James?
Exactly. They just changed international law. They adopted amendments to the international health regulations. Done. This is what I've been trying to tell everybody. the international health regulations that we've been a party to for decades have an amazing and fundamental flaw in the method in which they can be amended. You just saw them be amended last year. You didn't see, because they pointed the camera at the person running the meeting, but there's 194 delegates in the room. And they already met in the back room. They knew that they were all good with the amendments. And he said, are there any objections? Nobody said a word. Maybe somebody was in the back screaming and yelling and they ignored him. That happens.
Yeah.
But, this is like, all in favor say aye. Okay, the ayes have it, right? That's how they passed it, by consensus. It's called a silence procedure. If nobody speaks up and says, no, wait a minute, I object, it's done. Now, 194 unelected, unaccountable, mostly unknown people got in a room. They made an agreement on a set of amendments to 5 articles of the International Health Regulations, and that changed international law. Now, there are a set of 307 proposed amendments to the International Health Regulations that are being considered this time around, and they could be passed in that manner. Now, I don't think they're going to be, because I think there's great disagreement in the WHO, but they could agree to a small subset of those 307 amendments. And all they have to do is talk about whatever that set of amendments might be. Anybody got any objections? Well, Dave, you and I could be, here watching it live, screaming up and down, ranting and raving, going, hey, we object, we object, we object. But there is no public comment. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to go a little deeper down the rabbit hole here and go back and share a little bit more information, because this is what happened last year. Anytime anybody says, hey, hopefully you can see the video screen
Yes.
now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so I've got a bunch of questions for Richard Visick, the legal advisor. Just before that happened, they had been in some back room making some kind of deals. And the law is such that, the Secretary of State is supposed to be consulted before anybody agrees to a finally negotiated treaty or agreement of any kind. I can't imagine how, in the time structure that happened here, that the Secretary of State was informed about any changes that were made. Okay, so that's my first question. And these are questions that Congress should have been asking last year and should be asking all this year.
Mm-hmm.
Was Richard Visick consulted by the delegate Colin McIff regarding the proposed amendments before they were adopted? Maybe he was, right? Who, if anyone, was actually officially authorized to draft, submit, and negotiate these amendments? Now, maybe Colin McIff had a letter of delegation of authority to officially be someone to negotiate on our behalf, but that's part of the requirements that people have to have. Question number 4. Someone has to submit a request. This is just legal jargon for Circular 175 authority to negotiate. You and I can't just go to Geneva and negotiate an international agreement. Somebody has to be given authority to do so, right? And that would come in the form of a delegation of authority letter to whomever it is. Well, Dave, I spent a week trying to figure out who this was. This year, from February 20th to the 24th, this person was speaking on our behalf for the United States at the meeting in Geneva of the Working Group for Amendments to the International Health Regulations. And I have to admit, Dave, I had an epiphany. I realized why the Chinese do all of the facial recognition software. This person was speaking on behalf of the United States, and I couldn't figure out who she was. And so I ended up finding a thing online that allowed me to drop an image. So I did a screenshot, allowed me to drop an image in, and it used facial recognition software to identify the person on the image. But the companies are sneaky. You got to pay for their service to get it.
Yeah.
So they give you like 3 or 4 teaser pictures of, oh, looks like it's this person, right? So I took one of them and I put it into Google image, and it found the image that they found. And so I ended up figuring out who the person was. And as it turns out, the person who is speaking on our behalf is Mara M. Burr. I encourage people to give her a phone call or send her an email. We sent some emails, and she's out of office, for a while. Maybe she's back by now. And say, hey, when's the public comment period going to be? Right? She's proud to represent the United States. Here she is in, posting a group photo, and Colin McIv, give him a call as well. He's the vice chair of the working group that is considering this. I'm not doxing anybody, Dave. I dox myself all the time. This is their office phone number and so forth, right? Here he is on the left with Precious Mitsotso and other people associated with the working group, right? Give them a call and ask them when they're going to have a public comment period on what happened last year, which there wasn't a public comment period, and what is happening this year and maybe next year, right? And so question number 6 for Richard Visick, have they made a determination whether the proposed treaty, which they call a convention or agreement, is to be treated as a treaty that would require the advice and consent of the Senate, or is it just an executive agreement, or what might it be? Ron Johnson doesn't have to pass a bill through the Senate. He's just got to call Richard Visick and say, have you made a determination? Please do your job.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's all the law that backs up what I'm saying, that this has to be done. Now, people get really confused. There are treaties that in American constitutional law, you require the advice and consent of the Senate. It's actually the president that ratifies it. It's not that the Senate ratifies it. They give their advice and consent. But presidents can just sign an executive agreement.
Yeah.
And that's how we got into this mess in terms of the international health regulations. Just like President Obama signed the Paris Climate Accords, and then Trump signed us out and Biden signed us back in, there are tens of thousands of agreements that the United States has gotten into and never saw the light of day in the Senate.
Yeah.
Question number 7, and this is what blows people's minds, right? Is a signature by the president required to authorize the amendments that were adopted on May 27th, or will they just become legally binding due to inaction? Now, I believe that the answer is no, and here's why I'm bringing this up now. Every single nation on the planet has the authority under Article 61 of the International Health Regulations, when amendments are adopted, like you just saw, silence and everybody claps. Okay, great. We just changed international law. Isn't that great? They were all confused. They knew they did something shady. They knew.
Yeah.
Right? Every nation under Article 61 can write essentially a Dear John letter to the WHO, and the Secretary of State or the President could just write a letter and say, well, we're invoking our powers under Article 61 of the International Health Regulations. And, thank you so very much for these wonderful amendments, but no thanks. We reject them.
Right.
We want nothing to do with it. Appreciate the offer. Not for us. Everybody else can do it. We're not doing it. Right. Well, the time period for doing that is, is supposedly 18 months. So that happened last May. We're 10 months in. There's 8 more months. That'll bring us to November. Where's the uproar about, hey, what did they just change?
Yeah.
Why are we just accepting it? Well, the United States was behind the changes. And what they were trying to do was change that 18-month period where we could reject any changes and shorten it to 6 months. They negotiated hard for some other things, and it went to 9 months, and then it ended up at 10 months. Okay, so that change hasn't come into effect yet. So there's still 18 months to reject amendments, and that'll bring us all the way to November. But what they're trying to do is shorten it so that they can ram through something else this time or next time.
Yeah.
Okay. Just got a couple of more things that I want to go through with people, because I've got all kinds of questions in my open letter to Richard Visick.
Yeah.
Were members of the appropriate congressional committees informed about these negotiations? That's in the this thing right here. Just so everybody knows, FAM is the Foreign Affairs Manual. So these
Right.
are the rules in the State Department Foreign Affairs Manual that guide how all of these negotiations are supposed to happen.
Yeah. I mean, this demands, congressional oversight, and apparently there is none.
Question number 9. Is the advice and consent of the Senate required for these amendments to come into force for the United States, or will they become legally binding if they just sit on their butt?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe there's not a damn thing that Congress can do to stop these from coming into effect. Not a damn thing that Congress can do other than exit the WHO.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that the Senate or Congress can do to prevent these amendments from becoming legally binding? Now, I'm asking that question of Richard Visick. He's the legal advisor to the Secretary of State. I believe that the answer is no. There's nothing they can do, because we're already party to the international health regulations. And the only thing in the regulations that can stop what happened last year from coming into effect is for the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, or President Biden to send a Dear John letter to the WHO and say, no, thank you. Okay. Except they're the ones who pushed the amendments. So I don't think they're going to do that. And the public has no idea that it even happened.
Right.
Okay. And so it's very confusing as to the change of time periods. A lot of people are confused. So there's a question for clarification of that. And here's the big one, Dave.
Yeah.
There was obviously no opportunity for the public to comment on this. And, section 11, 725.1, section 6 says the interest of the public must be taken into account, and the public be given an opportunity to comment. All right. And so, hey, people, go down in the bottom and comment, right?
Yeah.
But call up your congressperson and ask them why they've been asleep at the wheel since last May, when changes to the international health regulations were adopted. I'm not making this stuff up. You saw the video. There's all the laws. Now, the changes were not the most horrific changes in the world, okay? But the point of this is the process by which the international law can be amended. We had no public comment. Congress was not consulted. There was no discussion in Congress. The president doesn't need to sign it. The Senate is not giving its advice and consent. I don't think there's a damn thing they can do to stop this other than public uproar and political pressure to get President Biden or Secretary of State Blinken to just write a letter and express our authority under Article 61 to reject the amendments. But they're not going to do that because they're the ones who pushed it. They wanted to shorten it down to 6 months from 18. They only got it down to 10. They're probably unhappy they wanted it to be a shorter time period. And the whole point is they're trying to ram through changes to international law.
Yeah.
And so this is a brain bender. And I know what happens, in most people's minds. They're like, wait a minute. How can it be that Colin McIff, who I'm sure most people never heard of before. I've never met or spoken with Colin. Sure, he's a fine, upstanding man, representing his country. And I mean that sincerely. Okay. But the position that he is in is an appointed position as a delegate to, and he's actually now a vice chair of the working group, right? We didn't vote him into office. Mara Burr didn't get voted into office. They're appointed individuals who it took me a week, and I had to use, facial recognition software and some other things to figure out who the heck she was. Yeah. People around the world have no idea who their delegates are, who are speaking on behalf of their nations, getting into potentially multi-billion-dollar deals with the proposed amendments, which we've talked a little bit about, and people can go on my Substack and learn about the massive changes that are proposed, right now. And so all of these questions apply to what actually happened last year. It's not theoretical. It's not open for discussion. This is what happened. This is where we are. There are pending amendments from last year's assembly that have not been discussed in any way, shape, or form. And there's nothing we can do legally to stop it other than convince President Biden or Secretary of State Blinken to just send a letter to the WHO to go, no, not for us. Now, every other nation on the planet could reject them just with a letter. But who the heck is paying attention? Everybody's asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
And so this is brutally dense, mind-bending. How in the hell can this possibly be the case? Well, when we agreed to the international health regulations all the way back in 1969, and then they amended them in 81 and 2005, part of what's in the regulations is the method by which we agreed that they could be changed. And the mistake that was made back then, or if you'd like conspiracy ideas, somebody did it on purpose to make it so that when something is changed, it doesn't say in the amending process that, oh, you've got to go back and ask your people. You've got to go back and, ask the people to vote if you're a democracy, or, consult Congress or the Senate or whatever. No, 194 unelected, unaccountable, unknown people can meet in a back room in an informal little thing in the Palace of Nations, reach consensus, come out and just be silent, hold up a document and say, any objections? Okay, it's approved. International law has changed. Yeah. So I'm just trying to raise awareness of something that is mind-bending. I told you this one was going to be.
And again, there's a lot of distractions out there. You get bank failures going on. You get the war in Ukraine. So a lot of people, there are layers of things that people are dealing with right now. So this is just, it's hidden behind all of the other sensational stuff that they will put on TV. But James, they're not going to put any of this on TV.
Well, I'm trying. Okay.
Yeah.
And so all those things are all, many of them are very important. Absolutely. Nuclear war, pretty important. Okay. Banking crisis, central bank digital currency. One of the amendments that they're trying to push, a number of the amendments that they're trying to push through, I encourage people to go to rejectdigitalenslavement.com. We've talked about that months ago.
Yeah.
They're trying to push through, what is getting awfully close to the Chinese social credit score system to make it so that you cannot move about the planet unless you do, horrific things to your body. And so they could do, and this is my concern, they could do what the Indonesian health minister talked about in November, which is adopt changes to the international health regulations to implement a digital health certificate system where you won't be able to travel unless you do what they tell you.
Yeah.
And so this is the process. Everybody, not everybody, the vast majority of people who are talking about this are confused because there's a treaty that's being discussed, and because it's commonly referred to as a treaty, people think, oh, United States treaty has to get the advice and consent of the Senate. Well, in 2003, the WHO adopted a convention agreement, or I'm sorry, a framework convention for the control of tobacco, and it never saw the light of day in the Senate. It was just adopted and off it went. And we're a party to that agreement. It doesn't work in real life the way people would like it to theoretically work according to the idealistic view of the founding fathers. Soon as they were gone, the Constitution started to get shredded. And
Yeah.
we're at a situation now where it's in tatters. And it's in tatters to the point where you saw how they adopted changes to international law that's legally binding. Now, the changes that they made last year, arguably not the worst thing in the world, but they're trying to shorten the period through which things would be implemented. And that's in advance of the changes that they want to make either this year or next year, whenever it may be. And I'm just sounding the alarm that people should pay attention to this as well, because they're based on what they did last year. They're coming back and trying to do it again, but in a much, much bigger way.
Yeah.
So
thanks, best
Dave.
thing we can do, James, call Congress, call the Senate, call
call me, give me a phone call, because this is mind bending. 310-619-3055. My Substack is jamesroguski.substack.com. As soon as you give me the link to this video will be sitting on the top of that article. And it's a truth bomb, right?
All right.
I mean, that's just documented law, documented amendments that were made, and a video documentation of them doing the dirty deed. And since then, I've been trying to get people to pay attention to this. Maybe this time people will.
Yeah. Well, we can only hope, James. James, thanks for being here again and getting this information out there. You're welcome back anytime, my friend.
Thank you, Dave.